Warning: the following show contains intelligent thoughts, well-formulated ideas, and occasional pointless banter. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello everyone and welcome to Hashing Out the Details. I am your host, D.L. Williams. Well, first of all, I want to apologize for the extended hiatus I've had since our last episode. Unfortunately, I think I ran into every conceivable type, form, and variety of challenge which prevented me from getting a new episode up and running. I mean, some of them were incidents of nature. There was a terrible sickness went through this house, knocking us all for a loop. I'm talking out of commission, adults, children, laying in bed with buckets on each side of the bed. That's how bad it was. We had a number of family obligations which really just sucked up a lot of our time over the last month or so. Just every which way you could think of, there was something going on which slowed me down. I actually had an entire episode recorded and in the can. I was literally about 5 minutes away from completing it, and the power went out. I lost the whole thing. So I just scrapped it and said, you know what, we're just going to pick up when I have a free hour or so to get things going, and that's where we're at today. So anyways, I'm going to give you a little update on what we've been up to here in this household. Yesterday, we took part in one of our favorite family traditions. We went strawberry picking. That was a hot experience. I do not envy those who pick vegetables and fruits for a living. I am practically crippled today from the amount of bending over I had to do. My wife and I picked just under 15 pounds of strawberries in about 90 minutes. My two snowflake children managed to accomplish about 4 berries each before they both called it quits because they were hot. While the two old folks, me and my wife, got out there, sweat, and challenged nature's progression with our spinal columns by bending over for 90 minutes picking strawberries. But the good news is we got plenty. We got everything we wanted. We'll be turning that, well, let me rephrase that. I'll be turning that into a beloved family treat, especially between my wife and daughter. And that's strawberry banana jam. I make it every summer around this time when we have all these strawberries. It's a recipe that actually I thought was lost for many years. It was something like a buddy of mine's grandmother used to make when we were kids, and we would eat it with, like Ritz crackers and that type of thing. It was really something we all loved. We pounded down. But unfortunately, I thought that item of food was lost to us for the rest of time until, by hook or by crook, I actually ended up getting back in touch with that particular friend through Facebook just about 7 or 8 years ago. And I had mentioned how much I missed that strawberry banana jam his grandma made. And he responded with, well, I know how to make it if you want the recipe. So he forwarded it on over to me. I made it a few days later, and let's just say my wife and daughter became addicts. They eat it on everything from ice cream to toast to my daughter simply eating it out of the jar with a spoon. I've always felt it kind of resembles the consistency of baby food, or it would be some kind of great baby food dessert if it weren't for the ridiculous amount of sugar that's in it. It's and I'm not going to claim it's the healthiest thing in the world, but it sure is tasty. In other news here in the Williams household, we have managed to finally start making headway with a dream of mine, which is to make our backyard a more usable space for the family. It was always more just someplace where I had my garden, and that was really about the limit of it, maybe a couple chairs out there. We have finally managed to make headway with getting our yard furniture a slightly more permanent and established area. We've managed to get a hammock and a hammock swing also that we've put out there. We've got our fire pit and what I think is now going to be kind of its permanent ongoing home. My barbecue grill has a now established place. I think we're finally starting to make some headway. I would like to next get a canopy out there so there can be some more shade on the other end of the yard. We have a very, very large tree on one end of the yard that provides quite a bit of shade, but that only covers mostly the yard furniture, and like we have a glider and a chair and some other stuff like that. You get basic yard furniture out there, and that really shades that in nicely. But the area where we have some of the other stuff is wide open in the hot sun. I'd like to get a canopy out there that we can use to shade some of that in the hotter months. And I'm hoping that we can now be able to start using our yard a little bit better than we have in the past. So anyways, on today's show, we're going to kind of cut things into just 2 sections today. I normally try to do 3, but today it's going to be, I think, 2. We're going to talk for the first portion of our show about that tragic school shooting out in Texas. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the whole matter. I do not have a singular particular view. I have multiple layers of thoughts on that whole event. And in the second portion of our show, we're going to talk about a subject matter that really is near and dear to my thinking and my understanding of the world around me. And I think you're going to understand what I mean when I say it's all about perspective. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how perspectives can change reality for individuals on a person-to-person basis. So stay tuned, sit back, relax, and let's get started. Okay, so the school shooting out in Texas, I can't put into words how much pain it actually is causing me on a personal level, because this one's not like a lot of the others. I've seen these school shootings now going all the way back to Columbine. I remember sitting on a couch with my best friend when the news of Columbine broke and all the live coverage was going on near the school when that whole tragedy happened. And I remember we just kind of looked at each other. We were just late teenagers when when that happened, and we looked at each other and we just were almost confused by it. But I remember we both looked at each other, and my best friend looked at me and goes, "It was probably some kid who got made fun of." And I shook my head, "Yep, probably." And it turns out we were actually kind of right. Now, what this particular shooting differs from in that is that the person who did the shooting was not some classmate. He wasn't some, there wasn't a axe to grind here with the individuals he was shooting. It appears as though this is a case of a man who simply lost his grip. There's a lot of things I think the police and the authorities are not talking about at this particular time. This man moved in with his grandparents just a few months before this happened. And the shooting event began with him shooting his grandmother in the face. Miraculously, it seems she survived this. Then he proceeds to drive to the school. Now, from what I'm understanding, he did not have a driver's license. So he didn't exactly know how to drive well. And it says that he crashed on the school property, or at least somehow the car came to an abrupt halt on school property. At which time he went in through a back door that he saw somebody open and close, began to open fire. He opened fire on little children. These kids did not have an issue with him. He did not have an issue with them. He killed a lot of young children. I think to myself about the idea of something happening to my little girl, who's 11. She's roughly in the age range of these kids that were killed, and I can't even bring myself to think about it. That's how horrifying this is to me. I think that's why it strikes home for me, is that these children were all in the age range of my daughter. I can't even fathom what those parents of those children must be feeling. I can't even begin to fathom it. My heart truly breaks, and it goes out to all of them. Now, that being said, I'm going to try to look at this from a reasonable and logical perspective. This young man who perpetrated this appears to have had less and less contact with his social circle over the last few months. A number of his quote-unquote friends, or people that he considered to be, his friends, have all spoken out saying he's become more and more distant lately. He didn't want to talk anymore. He was actually, some of them said that he was giving them the creeps These are all flags, folks, for an individual who was going down a rabbit hole into mental illness. Obviously, nobody caught on to it in time. I am the first to grant that liberty is the most important thing there is. But in the case of this young man, the freedom to do what he wanted to do resulted in the lack of the freedom of a number of people, adults and children especially. It denied their freedom to life. And that's a hard thing to try and explain or understand in a way that makes anything resembling sense. This young man appears to have become overwhelmed by the world around him. As best I've understood these stories and what I've been able to ascertain as being facts of the case, this young man, obviously, I mean, if you look at the context clues, he moves in with his grandparents just a few months before this. I believe the report said March. That's signs of a dysfunctional or broken domestic life, a family life. The fact that he so quickly turned on his grandmother or grandparents in some format, it would seem like that's an obvious further sign of a breakdown in, his ability to relate to family, or at least a breakdown of family dynamic and function. Another is this conversations he was seeming to have from a young lady, I believe it was in Germany, where he had told her he had purchased guns, and when she asked what he was going to do with them, he said, "You'll see." There's been other reports of comments he had made about causing, a scene or something like that, or that what he was about to do was something everybody was going to know about, everybody was going to remember. Those are all, again, flags, signs, whatever you want to call them, that something, quote, CCR, there was a bad moon on the rise. And when that's the case, when there's that many flags and there's that many signs pointing to something down the road, I'm not going to be so foolish as to question those around him that they should have known or they should have seen this coming, because that's impossible. Nobody can know what another person's going to do unless they're told. Unfortunately, this young man, he did not say straight out what he was planning on doing. Obviously, his intentions were very dark, and those around him did not perceive his commentary to be even close to what he ended up actually doing. That's really, again, quite tragic. It's very painful to think that. I can't even imagine what those folks around him who had heard him make these kind of comments about, "Oh, you'll see what I'm going to do," and things like that. I can't even begin to imagine the guilt that a lot of them are probably feeling, that they should have known what was coming. They should have been able to foresee it and take some kind of steps to stop it. Now that brings me to the question, what exactly could somebody have done? While you may want to get in on the gun debate, I think that's pointless. I don't think it's a gun issue. I think it's a mental health issue. Why was it a mental health issue? Because the man did something absolutely what appears to have been out of character, and to any reasonable individual, he did something that was utterly ludicrous, reprehensible, and, depending on the person's perspective, evil. Do I think that young man was an evil person? No, I don't. Very few people are, quote-unquote, what you might call evil. People do evil things all the time. People cheat, people lie, people steal, and they do that before they come downstairs for breakfast sometimes. I mean, you might not think you do, but every time you go above the speed limit, guess what? You're breaking the rules. And if a cop pulls you over and says, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" and you're like, "No," you're a liar now. Guys out there, you ever look at a pretty girl on the street, guess what? You're lusting. That's not great. It's just the way that it is. People do things that aren't the greatest. That doesn't make them evil. Even when they do something absolutely horrendous. What they did was utterly horrendous, but no, I don't think it was a horrendous person. Not from the things I've been hearing about him, from his family and from some, a few of his social connections, like, what you might call his friends. Most of them say he never really had many friends. It was just people he knew. With all of that said, I think that as time goes forward, what you're going to find out here is that, for whatever reason, this man broke. Something happened. He did not know how to respond to it, and now, sadly, little babies are dead. Unfortunately, little children have gone to meet their maker. And I'm not discounting the adults. So, we've spoken on the end of the shooting itself. I'm going to talk for just a second here about all the questions regarding the legal response, the law enforcement response, which, from everything I can scrounge up on this story, was a train wreck. It was a train wreck. Police, by their own reports, were on scene and inside the school 4 minutes from the time he walked in the door. That's how quick the response time was. Once they got there, they barricaded him into the classroom with the children and stepped out. Left him there for nearly an hour waiting for the SWAT team to arrive at the school. An hour. They barricaded him in with the children so that the children had no mode of escape, and then hightailed it out of there so that they could be safe, and waited for tactical response to arrive. I'm not ordinarily the type to critique or condemn anyone. But folks, if you're a cop and you have the opportunity and the know-how to face down this shooter, why would you even hesitate? They barricaded the man in for an hour. He had all that time to continue chasing students down. If their response took that long because they didn't feel it was safe, folks, you probably should not be a cop. And I'm not critiquing you, just you find yourself a different line of work. To sit outside and allow him free reign, during which time we've been able to track at least three children that were shot in the span of time while they were simply waiting for SWAT team to arrive. The idea of waiting for tactical assistance to arrive, I get what the chief was trying to accomplish. He was trying to keep his men out of harm's way. But if you look at virtually every police car across this country, they almost all have a very similar logo, or at least a slogan, that says something to the effect of, to protect and serve. It is my personal opinion that duty to protect those students, it wasn't just failed, it was failed royally. It was failed by somebody who I believe was overwhelmed by that moment, by that situation. There are very few police chiefs, or even worse, street cops, who have very much experience with school shootings. I certainly would hope there aren't many. This is something they're going to remember for the rest of their careers as probably one of the most serious events they ever come across. All those officers that were on site, and it's something that many in this country will never forget. I think after all the inquisitions have been completed, you're probably going to see the leadership of that police department no longer in a position of power. I believe you're going to see a lot of new guidance being sent out in response to these events. I think you're going to see police expected to take a more aggressive and active role in dealing with individuals who are being violent. So I can only hope that let it be a way for us to learn better responses to these types of tragic situations, and let it be a time for us to start taking notice of just how this culture is producing wounded and damaged individuals who perpetrate events like this. Our culture works at a speed that is absolutely detrimental to the human mind. We have cultural crisscrossing that is causing a great deal of confusion amongst our youth and amongst those who are susceptible to mental weaknesses and mental problems, especially illness. We are seeing a lot of triggers, a lot of pressure points being applied to the minds of many, and it's becoming more and more dangerous. So anyways, I'm going to take a break here for just a moment, and when I get back, we're going to talk all about perspectives and how they can really shift how you see the world. Sit tight, be right back. Okay, thanks for hanging with me. What we're going to talk about today is how perspective can so alter different people's thinking that it actually changes, in a way, the reality they live in, or at least reality as they understand it. Here's a perfect example. I want you to think to yourself about the most heinous person you can think of. For most people, they think of somebody like Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, in certain ways, is responsible for the death of nearly 10 million people between the Holocaust and the war itself, possibly more. Adolf Hitler is regarded by history as an insanely evil individual, or at least that's how often he's portrayed in the media. Now, being responsible for the death of millions and millions is certainly something that most of us would call an act of a depraved and evil individual. But what if I told you that Adolf Hitler was a very strong devotee and adherent to the theory of evolution? He studied it very intently and understood evolution on the human scale as being something along the lines of what I'm about to say here. He believed that at the bottom of the evolutionary scale, closest to apes and monkeys, were Jews, gypsies, blacks. Up the line, he believed that the Middle Easterns actually were next, with Asians a little somewhere akin to that, maybe a little higher. From that point, the Central to Western Europeans, being mostly aiming toward the Italians and the Germans, as being at the height of evolution on a human scale. Now, he was also a proponent of the idea that the Earth only had so much resource to offer its population. He looked at that and said to himself, if you look at the human beings that are existing upon this world, we've been held back by the lowest on the scales. They're using up resources that we, the highest evolved, could be using to further and advance the human race. So, from that mindset, he began what can be called an extermination of the lowest evolutionary class. And if you'd have asked him, don't you think exterminating the Jews, the gypsies, whatever blacks he came across in Europe as he moved along, he would have told you, of course it's not evil. I'm clearing out the waste. Those are humans that are taking up good resources from those who can advance humanity. He believed he was doing the world a great service. He was weeding the garden. Matter of fact, there's personal letters that they have of his that make mention of him referring to what we now call the Holocaust as a cleansing of the world from bottom feeders, from those that were taking up good resources from those that had the ability to advance the race, to make it a better world. He refers to weeding the garden on a number of different occasions. Some of his closest confidants and supporters quote that line from him a number of times, weeding the garden, that he was cleaning out the ones that were taking up the good resources from those who could actually use them, instead of just wasting them on human beings that were so far down the evolutionary scale they had no chance of being productive and of value to the world. From his perspective, he was doing the world a favor. So, that might sound ludicrous to somebody who, from modern times, looking back on it. But from his point of view, it made perfect sense. There was nothing moral about it. He was simply performing a public service. He was clearing out that which didn't serve a purpose. He was cleaning out the attic in a lot of ways from where he saw things. That example shows how a person's perspective can alter their view of reality. To most people now, we look around and see people of different ethnicities, of different genetics, as being of roughly equal value to each other. Obviously, many times very, very different, but equal in dignity and value. But from his understanding, through his study of the theory of evolution, he felt like, no, those don't have the same value as we, of this Nordic or Western European heightened and more evolved species of humans, or at least, version of humanity. It made perfect sense to him, and it shaped how he saw the world around him. For him, that was reality. For us, everyone is equal. Everyone is of, a common dignity and value is reality. Carl Jung, as I've mentioned on the show in the past, had a theory which I subscribe to called the theory of the window. And in short, what it said was that every person sees everything around them through a window, or a lens, if you will. Every experience they have in their life makes a little spatter, or a stain, shall we say, on the window. As they look through the window as their life goes on, what they see on the other side is not a completely clear view. It's skewed and it's altered by looking through those stains, those marks, those spatters, if you will, caused by life and events of their life and their upbringing and their nurturing, and all those things make their mark on that window. Some marks are good. I'm not to say that all experiences are bad or that they cause a degraded view. Sometimes a mark can help to frame what you see, to help you focus, to help you see it better, or at least to keep out some things that you might not need to see when you're trying to focus on what you're seeing on the other side of the window. But regardless of what kind of mark it is, it does change what you see when you look through that window. I think to myself of two siblings, raised in the same family, brought up much the same way. One child, climbing up a tree, falls from the tree. They hit two branches on the way down. One branch breaks a leg and the other branch separates their shoulder. They crash to the ground. They get a concussion. They're taken to the hospital. They have to have their shoulder put back in socket. They have to have their legs set. They get everything repaired somewhat, and they spend that entire summer stuck in a cast, unable to have fun and go swimming and really enjoy their summer vacation like everybody else. The other sibling climbs that tree 1,000 times throughout their youth, has absolutely no accident, nothing happens. Until one day, when he's about 15, he's climbing that tree and he slips and he falls. He misses all the branches and simply lands in the grass below. He has a sprained ankle. Now, for the rest of their lives, the first sibling never climbs another tree. Matter of fact, he never climbs up hardly anything. He's even afraid to climb up a ladder. The second sibling recovers from his sprained ankle in a couple weeks and climbs back up that tree again. He goes on to climb up on roofs and fix them. Becomes a roofer. First sibling never leaves the ground. He gets a desk job because he wants nothing to do with anything that might hurt him. The first sibling that fell saw the rest of his life through the lens of somebody who got seriously hurt because he fell. Because he was doing something physical and it hurt him. It bit him in a way. The second sibling learned that falling out of a tree doesn't really do much to you. His view was that, anything that can happen, I can take it. Both of them lived essentially the same childhood, but they lived very different lives because of how climbing that tree as a child affected them. It had one effect on one effect on the other, and completely changed how they saw reality. The first sibling saw doing things physically as dangerous or potentially something that could hurt you. The second saw doing something physical as something that the worst that can happen is you're going to get a little ding and you'll be just fine. That is how perspective changes reality, once again. This brings me to a lot of the things that we see going on in the world. I want you to look over at the Ukraine and Russia. And I brought this up on a previous podcast. The Russian government is led by Vladimir Putin, who lived a life of service and loyalty to the government, and in much of it, the communist government of the USSR. His worldview and his understanding of reality around him is based on the idea that Russia is the center of the world, and it is owed its respect and its place at the top of society. All of his actions are based on the idea that Russia comes first. It should always be first. It is the shining and highest epitome of culture, of stature, and of value. All other nations are below. So his perspective leads him to believe that his actions, while not only proper, are certainly acceptable. Because if you're at the top of the food chain, lesser nations don't tell you what to do. Lesser societies don't dictate to you how to manage and govern your country, which of course in his perspective is the top of the heap. Our perspective on the other side of the world is that what he's doing is an attack on sovereignty, an attack on an equally viable and rightful nation in Ukraine. That is a viewpoint not held by Russia. They do not consider Ukraine to be on equal sovereign footing as themselves. That difference in how to view those around you is at the heart of that conflict. It's not just about dollars, cents, farmland. It's about how Vladimir Putin, most especially, sees and perceives other countries and other entities around him. He perceives them as being below himself and the Russian nation. That changes everything, because if he's never going to see Ukraine or any other nation on equal footing as his own nation, the idea of bringing him around to our point of view is a moot point. It's a lost cause. You're not going to get him to see that way. His life experience has not taught him to see it that way. Going to be terribly difficult to find a diplomatic answer to that situation because of one thing: perspective. We're going to swing back around to this side of the earth and talk about another story here in the U.S. that's going on right now, and that's the matter of inflation, fuel prices in particular. Since President Biden took office, gas prices have so brutally risen. At this point in my home area, gas is just crossing over $5 a gallon. That's doubled, if not slightly more, since the day he took office. That has resulted in devastating effects to a lot of folks. I drive nearly 40 miles a day each way to work, and gas prices have forced me to dramatically cut back on extracurricular activities as far as driving to them, and to really start counting miles. It's sucking my bank account dry, as I'm sure it is many of yours. Now, from the perspective of those of us who are not financially invested in the petroleum industry, these rising gas prices have been painful at best, devastating at worst. For those who are financially invested, those stockholders, commodities dealers and brokers in the oil industry, oh my goodness, they are living the dream right now. They think this is the greatest thing that could have ever happened. Petroleum company dividends are at a record right now. So those people who've had, drip accounts and stock investments into dividend-paying petroleum companies and distributors, they are loving every second of this, because that's what they invested in. That's what they placed their trust in, is those kinds of investments, and have a vested financial interest in that market. They are seeing this as the promised land. This is the greatest thing that they've ever had happen. Those who are not, extremely painful. They can't wait for these prices to go back down, if at all possible. So, who's right? Is it the ones who are currently taking in high dividends, high profit margins? Are they high stock values, high commodities values? Are they right when they say, you know what, I put my money into this, I invested in it, nobody else had to invest in automobiles or car companies or airplanes or Campbell's Foods? They could have invested in this, but they didn't. I did, and I'm raking it in now. This is my just desserts. I'm making a profit because I deserve it. I bought something, I own into something, and it's doing very well. It's making high money. This should go on just as long as it possibly can. Or is it the single mother with 2 kids who is struggling right now just to keep enough gas in her car to get her kids where they need to go and get herself back and forth to work every day? She's looking at that saying, I never had the money to invest in the oil markets. I need these prices to come down. I can't wait. This is killing us. Whose reality is the right one? Is it the one who says this is the best of times, or is it the one that says this is the worst of times? So which is it? Perspective, folks. Perspective. It changes the reality you see. The next time you meet somebody and you think they're just really strange, or they have some oddball viewpoints on things, I challenge you to ask them a few questions about just why they think that. Ask them, what is it that gave you a feeling that there was evidence to support your way of seeing this? I'm willing to bet dollars to donuts that you're probably going to hear a story about, well, my aunt so-and-so said this one time because this happened to her. Or, well, I remember a couple years back I did this and this is what happened. And now see, here's what's going on now, and it's just like that. You will see the spatterings on their windows. You will see the smudges on the lens of their life that shape them to think the way they think and to see things the way they see them. If people can stop, turn just a little bit around, and look through other people's windows for just a second, oh, what a world-changing ability that would be. You'd see a lot more handshakes than punches in this world if that was the case. You'd hear a lot more talk and a lot less yelling in this world if that happened. You'd see a whole lot more people step back and say, you know what, it ain't worth fighting over. In this case, maybe we should just agree to disagree, because I see where you're coming from. But I disagree with you. But we might both have a point. The world needs more of that, my friends. It needs it desperately. There are a lot of things in this world that are not moral issues. They're matters of perspective. The more people are taught and encouraged to take a step back and see things from other people's perspectives, I think we're all going to live in a better world. So anyways, I think that's just about all the time we're going to have for today. Thank you all again for listening in. I hope this has been at the very least a little enlightening for you, just something else you can think about during your morning or afternoon commute. Take care, everybody. This has been D.L. Williams. Have a great week.